Hello and welcome to the latest in Inlet Asia's Expert Insight series. Today I'm delighted to be joined by another of our advisory board members, Joseph Jacobelli of Asia Clean Tech Energy. Joseph, it's good to speak with you again. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you for having me, Melissa.
Of course. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. So first off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm originally Italian, but I've been in Asia since 1979, especially if you include Australia as part of Asia. I lived in Australia, lived in Taiwan, and been in Hong Kong since 1990. I've been looking at the Asian energy markets since 1990, both as an equity analyst for various international banks, as well as on the development side, initially with a very large utility back in the late 2000s. And I was in renewable energy then when renewable energy was very new. And more recently for another company called Simfura, which is a startup looking at clean energy investment opportunities in Asia.
Beautiful. Great. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your background. Now going straight into it, what changes have you seen in the power sector financing the last 12 months since the onset of the ongoing pandemic? We know it's top of mind for everyone. Is the capital still available? Where is it being directed? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I mean, and it's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds. And the reason is because I don't think that the pandemic per se has greatly, massively affected the long-term capital flows. But what it did is accelerate some of the trends that we've been seeing for a number of years. One of them, of course, is the move from brown, i.e. fossil fuel generation, to green and sustainable power generation. And different countries in Asia have been doing at different speeds. You know, some are more speed of an old Fiat 500, and other ones are more at the Lamborghini kind of speed, using Italian analogies. But the trend is definitely there. And so, in terms of capital, you've seen a lot of reluctance in terms of capital going towards fossil fuel power generation, especially coal. Gas is still okay, and as we know, gas has got half of the carbon footprint of coal-fired generation for newer power generation assets. So you got a whole bunch of companies that have announced that they don't want to be involved in coal-fired generation anymore. You've got a whole bunch of banks which basically have declared that they're not going to be lending any money at all to any coal-fired power plant anywhere. So that has probably accelerated since kind of the pandemic, as opposed to being a completely new trend. So I see a lot more capital going towards green energy, green and sustainable. There's also more capital available for some of the newer technologies and some of the newer clean energy sources, such as green hydrogen, for example, which is something that people have talked about for a very long time. But it's only this year that we've seen some very, very massive kind of announcements out of Australia, out of China, and of course Europe, in terms of capital also going towards the development of that. So yes, I'm not sure if that answers the question. It's quite a complex question, actually.
Yes, it is. No, and it does. I think that this last year and now this year, we're just seeing so many changes for a lot of different reasons, and of course, the pandemic being one of them. So I think that we'll continue to see more of this progress. But I completely agree. There's definitely been an acceleration with regards to green energy. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just add on one thing that now that I hear what your subsequent comments is that obviously you've seen one major change, which is on the demand front, right? And if you are looking, like if you're an energy trader or looking more the short-term demand, obviously the pandemic has hit demand quite quite significantly. For example, if you see China, the latest numbers for 2020, industrial demand, which accounts for something like 67% demand of the total, only rose by 2.5%, whereas residential demand grew at about 7%. But as far as I'm concerned, when you look at energy, you really need to look at it on a 10, 20, 30-year view, because of the nature of the assets. So the pandemic did kind of stall both demand as well as some projects as well. There was a slowdown in, for example, some of the offshore wind projects in Taiwan. So there was obviously an effect. But again, if we look at it on a longer term basis, it's probably just going to be a blip, quite a significant blip, but still just a blip.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. And I mean, we kind of already spoke on this, but how has the pandemic colored your view about the future outlook of the energy sector? And further, how has the pandemic well, we kind of already talked about how it's affected it, but with regards to the future outlook, what were you thinking?
Well, I think, number one, as mentioned, you're gonna see a lot more, green and sustainable energy around. That's not it's no longer going to be limited to, tree huggers, but it's going to become kind of increasingly mainstream. And you see it already with companies that are talking about sustainability and meeting some of the energy-related United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as one big picture, one big strategy. Now, of course, you're going to see still a very significant role for natural gas-fired generation. It's going to see major increases, for example, in China in terms of that. Nuclear in some countries. Japan is going to be a lot less than expected. In China, it's going to be likely a lot more than expected, especially now that President Xi Jinping has come out with the net zero target for China sometime before 2060. And so nuclear will have to play a very large role in China for that. And I think you were also asking about, the financing and how I see kind of like the financing evolving over the next 10, 20, 30 years. You've seen green bonds going through the roof. The numbers are just totally staggering. And what also you're seeing now is more thematic bonds or almost you could call them issue specific bonds with very set parameters. And so you're seeing an evolution in the capital markets and corporates pretty much very much adopting that. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. So in Asia, I don't recall any major utility doing it yet, but some of the property companies, for example, have followed the path of Enel, the Italian utility, where they issued a green bond, and basically they set, a coupon, say, pick a number, say 1%, 2%, whatever, basically saying if we meet our sustainability target, then our coupon is going to, by a certain year, the rate is going to be lower. But if we don't meet the targets, then the rate is going to be higher. So this kind of parameters and this kind of novel, let's call it adjustments to established financial tools, because at the end of the day, green bond is just a bond, right? But these new adjustments and new evolutions, I think we're going to see a lot more of them. That's on the credit side. Banks are increasingly talking about their green loans portfolio. So they, as I mentioned earlier, some banks have already declared we're not going to be lending any money to any kind of coal-fired power plant whatsoever. So green financing is also a trend which is going to be accelerating over the next few years. And also there's a lot of stuff that maybe we just don't know. For example, tokenization, right? The whole blockchain side of, or the fintech side of things, which would allow, for example, a small project, say, a project which is $5-10 million. Those projects find green and sustainable projects find it very, very difficult to find financing because it's too big for friends and family. but then it's too small for any bank to really bother with it. Why would it spend all that kind of capacity and human resources doing the analysis of a project which is so tiny? At the end of the day, we're going to get so little commission out of it. Another evolution that possibly will happen is that there is pressure, as far as I can see, on people like the Asia Development Bank, the AIIB out of Beijing, to actually be a little bit more proactive and a little bit more progressive when it comes to green and sustainable, because by the very nature, green and sustainable projects are smaller, right? And if you're a big bank like ADB and AIB, again, why would I bother with a very small project? But it is actually their job, because it's got the word development. Asia Development Bank is supposed to be helping. So are you going to come up with more aggressive measures so as to help some of the green and sustainable, smaller green and sustainable project? That's another trend that I see in terms of the evolution of different financial tools. And last but not least, there's an equity side to it as well. Me being a former equity analyst, working for a variety of international brokers, and that would be with more IPOs of perhaps smaller companies, or perhaps they can issue security tokens instead of shares, if that's that again is the cost is lower, because by the very nature these companies are quite small as well. So that could be another evolution. So in a nutshell, and sorry for going on and on about it, but I think it's a great and really interesting subject. I think there's going to be established tools which are going to evolve to allow for more green and sustainable financing, and also you're going to get some new financial tools becoming more common over the next 10 20 years, like tokenization of assets, for example.
Perfect. I think we kind of went over basically the next couple of questions with regards to financing trends and capital varying across the region. So I think we've covered that very well. So thank you very much. With regards to the push towards a lower carbon future, since it's gathering pace here, we have heard increasing mention of sustainable goals such as UN's SDGs, particularly when we recently interviewed EGAT's new governor. Do you think this is a trend we can expect to see continue?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to become almost apolitical, because as you see, in the United States or in Europe or in other places, government A comes in and says we're going to go green, etc. And then after 4 years or 5 years, new government comes in and says, we've kind of changed our priorities and now it's no longer important. But I think that the global momentum now is just too big and too strong for people to ignore it. And so, you've got some laggards in Asia, like Australia, for example, where, you've had, I forgot how many governments in the last 10 years. And they, some are pro green and sustainable, some are not, but they all going to have to kind of follow the same route. And if I can use an analogy, which is electric vehicles, or an example, I should say, electric vehicles, where some countries have been a little bit more reluctant, e.g. Australia, for example. Some countries have been a lot more aggressive, e.g. China, in terms of the introduction of electric vehicles. But sooner or later, these countries won't have a choice, because there won't be any internal combustion engine vehicles produced 15 20 years from now, or even sooner. So you don't have a choice but to get on the boat. And as people realize that, then they're going to have to follow. So in short, there is a global momentum, and also there's some macroeconomic forces which are going to force you to basically come up with real targets and meet these targets. And last but not least, of course, is the fact that the levelized cost of energy, or the cost per kilowatt hour of some of what I view the newer technologies such as wind and solar, which are actually not that new, but in the energy mix are relatively new. You see that costs coming coming down and being very, very, very competitive. And now in some countries, even if you add, energy storage, the price per kilowatt hour is also very, very competitive. So all of a sudden you've got an economic argument and say, why would I, invest in a, say, gas-fired power plant where I don't really know what the price of gas is going to be tomorrow morning because it's volatile, where I can build, wind where the price is much more stable, coupled with, some form of energy storage. So yeah, I think the trend will accelerate, and the announcements about China, Japan, and Korea, I expect is going to be just a lot more in amongst Asian economies over the next 3-4 years.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue into our next question. So, with regards to China, how do you think China plays into the shifts in attitude towards changes in the industry, especially with regards to financing more green energy options?
That again is probably as complicated, if not even more complicated than your first question. If you look at it just from apolitical, if we take geopolitics and put them on the side, obviously, China is the center of the world when it comes to, solar cell manufacturing and expertise. They're doing extremely well in wind as well, and some of the other clean energy technologies such as waste to energy, for example. And they're very, keen to have their companies to go abroad and, either sell the equipment or some of the utilities actually investing into clean energy, say wind farms or whatever it is overseas. But then you've got the whole kind of geopolitics and political aspect, which I'm not an expert in, which so far have proven to be a barrier towards all of that China can offer. But if the question is, can China offer capital attractively priced capital for investment of renewable energy projects around the region in Asia? The answer is absolutely yes. Do they have the manufacturing and the EPC know-how? Absolutely. Do they have the interest? Yes. But again, you've got these kind of geopolitical factors which for now, and I'm sure things will change because politics always change. Even the Cold War with the Soviet Union did not last forever. So things will change, but for now, I think that's the biggest barrier, the biggest bottleneck is the geopolitics.
I could see that. Yep, there's been a lot of changes lately. So hopefully it'll go towards the right direction.
Yes.
With regards to, we have seen some ambitious national renewable energy targets in the region, with countries moving in different speeds. Asia will take place in Indonesia next year, actually. With regards to their goal for 2025, do you believe their new national commitment to integrate 23% renewables into the energy mix is possible? Why and why not? Or why not?
Possible, yes. Likely, maybe not. And the reason is because there are, historically, all I can do is to look at the last 5 or 10 year history and track record to kind of judge where things are likely to be in the next, 5 or 10 years. And I think the problem in Indonesia is really got to do with the whole processes, the bureaucracy, getting the projects, approved. A lot of also has got to do with, I think the bureaucracies and the processes. The Indonesian authorities are absolutely aware of the issues, which is positive. They have tried to tackle them, but it's been very, very difficult, both at the national level as well as at the local level. If you look at some of the kind of neighbors, Malaysia, Thailand, of course, these are much smaller countries in terms of population, in terms of size, and also in terms of complexities, because Indonesia's got so many islands. but they have been a little bit more coherent, especially Thailand in terms of their policies. Not that they haven't had bumps on the road in terms of the Thai energy development, especially when it comes to renewables over the last few years. But every country has bumps, right?
Sure.
But if you look at where they were and where they are now, they've done extremely well. Malaysia has not taken the straight route. They kind of taken a zigzag route, but also Malaysia is kind of getting there in terms of developing their renewables and kind of meeting some of the targets. Vietnam is another example where they've got some very, very serious issues right now, but it's still kind of moving forward. And Indonesia, has wanted to develop, other resources for a very long time. And we investors have found some challenges with the processes and the bureaucracy. And I think like I said before, the good news is that the government knows about it. So, they may be able to tackle it. They will tackle it, absolutely. The problem is when, and, whether it's, by the time that that they have to meet their 2025 target, it's a little bit unclear right now to me.
Agreed. And 4 years it's going to be here before we know it. So I think that's the challenge there too. Time is almost running out.
Exactly. In energy terms, it's a very short time.
Agreed. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Joseph? We appreciate your time today.
No, I mean, thank you very much for having me and allowing me to share some of my views. I think in conclusion, I mean, based on everything that I said, at the end of the day, you're seeing, this move from brown to green, which was happening before the pandemic, has been accelerated. Another thing we didn't really talk about much is also the digitalization, especially, digital energy technologies and solutions. That's also been accelerated over the last 12 months in terms of investments, etc. And that's extremely important because, as you know, you need to manage these new grids. Because obviously, you don't have solar power when there's no sun, and you don't have wind power when there's no wind. So you have to, you can put in energy storage, but at the same time, you really need some very sophisticated demand side management solutions. And you're seeing, companies, companies from NG, the French utility, in Asia, to Korea Electric Power, investing an enormous amount of time and money in trying to kind of accelerate some of these digital solutions, which are going to work together with, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain. So that's another trend which I think is happening over the next few years and has been accelerating in the last 12 months.
Absolutely. Yep. Another important point. So thank you for making that. I think that's all for us today. So I do really appreciate your time, Joseph. Thank you for sharing your insights with the Inlet family. And we look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me, Melissa.